So what I wanted to do here today was talk about DC versus Marvel in terms of film. Well, I wanted to talk about why one always seems to be better than the other, that being Marvel, and what the other can do and has already kind of started to do to make a comeback, that being DC. So to start off, why does Marvel seemingly have the superior films? Why is it that DC continues to struggle when it comes to competing with Marvel? Well, let's start by looking at how both of these universes grew. Starting with Marvel, the MCU didn't really kick off until 2008's Iron Man, which was a pretty well-received film, but the one takeaway that people got from that film was that they saw Nick Fury at the end of the film talking about the Avengers Initiative. And at the time, nobody really knew what that meant because at the time, not a lot of people were familiar with the Avengers or Nick Fury or even Iron Man for that matter. Iron Man wasn't even that popular of a character until the movies started happening. Not saying that he didn't have his fans before, it's just there wasn't as many of them then as there are now. Also in the same year, we got another Marvel movie in The Incredible Hulk, which at the end of that film, we do get to see Tony Stark talking to Thunderbolt Ross about putting together a team. And from then on, people were starting to put things together slowly but surely that all these movies were leading to the formation of a team that was going to take on some great threat. Fast forward to the first Avengers movie we got in 2012, and you got to see all these heroes from all these different movies come together to save the world. And it was quite a cool concept. Like, nothing like this has ever been done before, and it was cool to see this happen on the big screen for the very first time. Meanwhile, with DC, Christopher Nolan was just wrapping up his Dark Knight trilogy with The Dark Knight Rises, so we didn't really get to see the formation of DC's cinematic universe until 2013's Man of Steel, which doubled up as both a Superman reboot as well as the launch of the DCEU. But unlike the MCU's Iron Man back in 2008, which was met pretty favorably by critics and audience members alike, Man of Steel was a very mixed opinion film. Some people really liked it and some people really did not like it. Me personally, I didn't care for Man of Steel that much, but hey, that's just me. And while Marvel would get through with a second wave of films, even having another Avengers film, we didn't get to see another DCEU movie until 2016's Batman v Superman. And around this time, Marvel was working on its own superhero fight film in the version of Captain America Civil War. And when you look at Batman v Superman, you can tell just how desperately Warner Brothers is trying to compete with Marvel. Like, it was a movie that tried to do too much too soon, and suffers as a result. And while there were some people that did like Batman v Superman, despite all the flaws that movie had, more people were turned off against this movie than they were against Man of Steel. So right here, we're already starting to see a decline for DC. And while Marvel was building up to their next Avengers film, DC would have Justice League come out a year and some change later. And sure, we had Wonder Woman and Suicide Squad before that. There really wasn't much that built up to the Justice League movie in those previous two movies, save for like that one scene that Bruce Wayne has with Amanda Waller. And Justice League was the worst film yet, due to all the meddling behind the scenes. For those of you that don't know, Justice League was slated to be 2 films. However, Warner Bros. Was also said to be completely unhappy with Zack Snyder after the poor reception people were giving Batman v Superman, and so, while Zack Snyder's reason for leaving was primarily due to the fact that his daughter had passed away, Warner Bros. Used this as an excuse to get rid of Zack Snyder entirely. Then they brought in Joss Whedon, who rewrote most of Zack Snyder's original work for Justice League. On top of that, instead of getting 2 distinct Justice League films, Warner Bros. Made it so that it would only be 1 film. And more went into it than just that, but the point that I'm making here is that due to all these off-screen changes, we got the version of Justice League that we got in the theater, and the film was a flop. Meanwhile, on the Marvel side, everybody was anticipating things like Black Panther and Infinity War, as well as Endgame. And even though those movies have their fair share of flaws as well, there's no denying the fact that those films have made Marvel a shit ton of money, more so than Zack Snyder's DC universe. So Marvel definitely did it right as far as building up to their universe, whereas DC tried to forcibly make things work for the sake of competing with Marvel. And to an extent, I get it, because why would you want to watch a solo Flash film when Marvel's gonna have their new Avengers film a week before that? I can understand them wanting to put asses in seats, but they should have gone about it in a much better way. But build-up isn't the only reason why people say that Marvel is the better brand. They also say that Marvel is more comic book accurate than DC. And I agree with that sentiment to a certain extent. Like, Marvel definitely does pull more from the comics than DC does. Like, I think the most comic book accuracy stuff we got from DC was the Dark Knight Returns stuff in Batman v Superman. I think that was about it. Whereas Marvel definitely captures more beats from the comics. However, Marvel isn't completely perfect when it comes to comic book accuracy either. Like, for example, their treatment of Spider-Man in these films. This version of Spider-Man is not Peter Parker. This is white Miles Morales, under the guise of Peter Parker. Like, he has a hero mentor that he looks up to. He's always acting so awkward. He's constantly in the shadow of another hero. There's nothing about him that makes me think that this is Peter Parker. Like, even Peter Parker in the Ultimate comic wasn't like this. The whole with great power comes great responsibility thing feels like an afterthought when it comes to this version of Spider-Man. But that's his whole stick, and they just kinda throw it away. Case in point, look at Far From Home. You got Nick Fury, well, fake Nick Fury, but still, saying that we need your help and there are no other heroes available at the time. And Peter's just like, nah fam, I just wanna go on my trip and give her a girl. Now don't get me wrong, he was supposed to learn some type of lesson at the end, like, sometimes you need to sacrifice what you want for the greater good. I would have been fine with that. But that's not the case, he's just a very lackadaisical hero in the film. And the Spider-Man stuff with the MCU isn't the only thing that's inaccurate to the comics, but my point is, Marvel is not bang on the money when it comes to comic book accuracy. I think the most comic book accuracy they've had in their films was during Phase 1, and then people started to take more creative liberties from there. Now I'm not saying that everything has to be exactly like the comics, but if you want to talk about inaccuracy, let's talk about inaccuracy. And like I said, DC is also guilty of not staying true to the source material. Like, look at how Batman was in Batman vs Superman. The way that he acts in that film towards Superman, that is how Lex Luthor would act. And what's really stupid about that is you have Lex Luthor in the film, but he acts like a fucking clown more so than the fucking clown. And don't get me wrong, I can understand changing things for the better, but both Marvel and DC have changed things for the worse. It's just that one started out that way, while like I said, the other took more liberties later on. Now like I said, in Marvel's case, Phase 1 seemed to have been the most comic book accurate they were with characters like Thor, Iron Man, Hulk, and Captain America. With Phase 1 and half of Phase 2, Marvel was still sort of kind of trying to find their footing when it came to making these superhero movies. And I feel like the thing that really kind of changed the game for Marvel as far as making these films were Iron Man 3 and Guardians of the Galaxy. With Iron Man 3, they took a big risk in turning the film's antagonist, the Mandarin, Iron Man's arch nemesis, this guy right here, into this.
My name's Trevor Slattery. The Mandarin, see, it's not real.
Ready for another lesson?
Blah, blah, blah. Well, I panicked, but then I handled it.
This is the Mandarin?
I know, it's embarrassing.
And while comic book fans like myself were royally pissed at that, people that don't read comics and stuff, the people that outnumber us 1,000 to 1, didn't give a shit. They thought it was great. On top of that, they also liked all the jokes that they put in that movie, and so for them it was probably one of the best superhero films ever, which is debatable, but they liked it. And Guardians of the Galaxy followed similar beats with drastically changing characters and adding in a bunch of humor. The difference being is that in Guardians of the Galaxy, the humor was better timed, and on top of that, the changes that they made to the characters were either made for the better, or they weren't as severe as what was done to the Mandarin. However, Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios are looking at this, and what they're taking away is, we need to double down on humor, and we can take more liberties with the source material because most people watching our films don't know what the source material is. And that's true, most of the people watching these Marvel films didn't have a clue as to who these characters were, well most of them anyway, until they were in the movies. And by now people are so ingrained with the Marvel formula of how they do films, that they can take a character like Spider-Man, make a movie like Far From Home, which is a mediocre film by the way, but people will still think it's the bee's knees. Which, don't get me wrong, how you consume media is completely subjective, but when these movies start to feel similar to one another just with a fresh coat of paint for each one, then I'm just kinda like, careful Marvel, your blueprints are showing. However, on the DC side of things, they've been taking liberties from the start, drastic ones. And while that did turn a lot of people away from DC, there were quite a few people that actually liked that. They liked the fact that this wasn't something that they had seen before, and they could just go into it fresh and be surprised at the things that were gonna happen. They liked the fact that DC is willing to take more risk with its characters, as opposed to Marvel. That being said, however, the characters that they choose to change up are well established in pop culture. So when people don't like something about what DC is doing, it's easier to point out than it is with Marvel, who took characters that people didn't know that well at all. Unlike a character like Superman, who's had plenty of movies, TV shows, and cartoons prior to his Man of Steel appearance, a character like Captain America, who, while he has been in a couple of things, never reached that level of iconic. So if something is done wrong by him, then it isn't as noticeable as it is with a character like Superman. So to sum up why the DC film division is struggling, they rushed to get their universe established, they took a bunch of creative liberties with the characters they were working with, and behind the scenes it seems like DC was kind of a house divided against itself, primarily talking about the whole Justice League debacle. And really quickly, I do want to talk about the Snyder Cut. While yes, it was better than what we got in the original theatrical release, a good chunk of the movie is spent better familiarizing you with some of the characters like Steppenwolf, Flash, Cyborg, Cyborg, Aquaman, you know. I guess I just feel like if Warner Brothers had taken their time to set things up properly, you could have used that extra hour and a half or so to greater effect. Now again, it is better than the Joss Whedon cut, but it still has a lot to be desired. Like if you weren't a fan of Zack Snyder's DCEU before, then this probably won't do much for you, but if you were a fan of Zack Snyder's DCEU, well then Merry Christmas. I know a lot of people are wondering what's going on with that whole post-apocalyptic world thing, and that's kind of drawing interest into Zack Snyder's DC world, but for me, I'm more interested in that world as opposed to how we get to that world, if that makes sense. But moving on, now that we talked about why DC is lagging behind Marvel, I think it's time we finally talk about what DC can do to finally catch up. Because I don't want to see DC fail, I don't want to keep going to DC movies and being like, man, this sucks. I like DC and I would like to see quality DC content on the big screen. And a way that I feel like they can do this is just go back to making films about superheroes that don't connect into like a larger universe. Like if you want to make a new set of Batman films, go ahead and do that. If you want to make a set of Flash films, go ahead and do that. But I feel like the whole shared universe thing has kind of run its course. Like I don't know about you guys, but I'm kind of burnt out of the whole shared universe trope at this point. Like it was fun at first, but now, like in the case of Marvel, it's gotten so big to the point where you have to question every single action a character takes. Like if Wanda is off wreaking havoc in some town, you have to ask yourself, why doesn't Doctor Strange come and stop her from doing all this shit? I mean, he was there when Loki was there and all he did was touch ground. And you mean to tell me he's gonna let Wanda do her own thing? Forgive me if that seems kinda sus. But by making movies and shows about characters that aren't connected to any universe, not only do you not have to answer tough ass questions, but you can also do a lot better by the character themselves. Like make no mistake, Thor is an Avenger budget level character, but you won't see that out of Thor because they need the Avenger budget for the Avenger films. But if you did have that budget and apply it to Thor, then you might be able to do more justice by that character. Especially if he's, like I said, not tied down to a shared universe. DC could do something similar and bring in that money. And making standalone films has already proven to work. I mean, look no further than Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, or something even more recent, the Joker film. Now that was a smash hit, and it was rated R too. But despite it all, it still grossed over $1 billion. Also, you can give us different iterations of the character instead of having this character be one way for like 10 years. Like I'd love to see a Superman Red Sun movie, or a Kingdom Come movie, or dare I say it, like this would be the perfect time to capitalize on things like this, especially considering just how woke the Marvel Cinematic Universe is getting. And while DC has also kind of stepped its toe into woke waters, considering the fact that they have more of a reputation of being the inferior brand anyway, I do feel like they can turn around should they choose to try. Whereas with Marvel, I do feel like they've hit the iceberg and it's only a matter of time before they start sinking to the depths. Now it is going to be a slow decline, but a decline nonetheless. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying throw out multiple versions of Batman, multiple versions of Superman. Use characters that we haven't seen before as well. John, Stewart, Green Lantern. Ooh, excuse me. But that's just how I would run things if I was in a position to do so. But let me know what you guys think. Do you prefer Marvel or DC? Also, are you guys still liking the whole shared universe with all these characters, or would you prefer more of a standalone approach with these characters, just kind of take it back to basics? As always, support your emperor by leaving a like and hitting subscribe. And help me expand my empire by following me on these social media platforms. You wouldn't want to commit treason now, would you?